Sorry. God damn it, Angel. Anyways, welcome to the first ever recording of Hyperfocused on Nothing podcast, or the HypeNothCast. I'm Angel.
I'm Roan.
I'm JJ.
And I'm Izzy.
And today we will be discussing on argumentative thesis for our graphic novel studies final project.
We will be discussing Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, a Family Tragicomic, in which serves as a lens into the realistic and complex nature that is being LGBTQ+. For years, the LGBTQ+ community has been perpetrated in media as one-dimensional caricatures. They've been simple objects of entertainment and stripped of human experience. The book challenges these ideas regarding the roles of gender, sex, and societal expectations like masculinity and femininity. Good, accurate representation is important. Being faced with the reality of the world is what humanizes the community and brings greater empathy and acceptance.
The idea of homosexuality and gender being a modern idea is incorrect. As in early Greek and Roman times, sexuality between men was fairly fluid. All throughout history, there have been remarks of homosexual relations, but the term itself hadn't been created until the mid-1800s. In 1868, the term homosexuality, coined from Caroline Maria Kirpin-Benny, a Hungarian journalist, translator, and memoirist, and human rights campaigner. In 1969, he published 2 pamphlets calling for the emancipation of repressive laws in Germany, marking the earliest movement for gay liberation.
Gender hierarchies have separated men and women for centuries. Men have been deemed to have physical strength, the ability to use violence, and authority, whereas women have been deemed to be the opposite. These separations are shown through vast differences we see in masculinity versus femininity and how these gender separations have been applied to sexuality. We see numerous examples of this in the graphic novel, which we will talk about. So, Fun Home details the complicated relationship between Alison and her father, Bruce. The two of them are very similar and yet very different from one another. Alison is confirmed to be a lesbian, and her father is confirmed to have gay relations with men. Alison is more masculine in the way she presents herself, and her father presents himself in more feminine ways, albeit more subtle than his daughter. For example, throughout her childhood, she would participate in boys' activities. Alison and her friend Beth Griglewicz dressed up and played as men in their games. The first game they played as police officers, and the second game they played as con men, shown on pages 160 and 182. Also, her older cousins have given her the nickname Butch, shown on page 96.
Going off what Roan mentioned, sexuality and the different ways Alison and her father view their sexualities hugely impacts their relationship. Bruce continues to repress his sexuality while Alison explores the truth of hers and tries to embrace it throughout the novel, which is evident in her attempt to come out to her parents through the letters she wrote to them in college in Chapter 3. Unfortunately, Bruce projects his repressive nature within his home and prevents the two of them from being able to relate in their similar sexual orientations, driving a wedge between them and leading Alison to discover herself outside of their home, like many other LGBTQ+ people have.
Alison wants to compensate for her father's lack of masculinity, and her father wants to express femininity through her. Alison further discusses her and her father's relationship with masculinity and femininity to be, quote, inversions of one another. On page 99, the family is going out to dinner, and Alison refuses to wear a string of pearls her father insists upon. He shouts at her, "What are you afraid of? Being beautiful? Put it on, goddammit!" And Alison shouts back, "Leave me alone!"
That was my favorite part.
This part is also really interesting, considering that a man who takes his sexual identity into consideration has a conscious masculinity and an unconscious femininity. These psychological characteristics, quote, assume dimensions of the personality experienced by the individual as masculine and or feminine.
Bechdel also quotes Proust's term inverts, which she describes as defining the homosexual as a person whose gender expression is at odds with his or her sex, on page 97. This demonstrates the third leg of conflation of sex, gender, and sexual orientation, which is the conflation of sex and sexual orientation shown by the way in which sexual orientation is surmised by the sameness or differences of sexes within a coupling, that Francisco Valdez defines in his project of deconstructing that conflation. Proust is giving way to this conflation by saying that homosexuals are inverts because the nature of their gender, sex, and sexuality do not align with the societal norms or conflations of such. This conflation is seen in Bruce and Alison's relationship, with him constantly trying to force the societal expectations of a female's behavior and lifestyle onto her, despite having his own conflicting interests within his sex and sexual orientation. Similarly, Alison does the same to her father, wanting him to adapt more stereotypical manly behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Also, going back to what Izzy just said about Alison seeing her father as a big sissy, she decided that she would step in where he fell short in his masculinity, which is shown on page 96.
I found that stereotypes and the conflicts of gay men and lesbian women are very intricately intertwined. In Fun Home, Alison and Bruce are almost perfect examples of each stereotype of their sexuality. Bruce wishes that Alison would be more feminine and tries to push what he wants to be onto her. The way people believe gay men are feminine and lesbians and lesbians are masculine is called kite and Dow inversion theory, which is where people assume that gay and lesbian individuals are most similar to heterosexual people of the opposite sex. One of the main stereotypes of gay men is that they are all feminine. Another extremely harmful stereotype of gay men is that they are pedophiles, which is frankly quite the opposite. Normally, heterosexual men with a wife and children of their own have a higher rate of being child predators.
Oh. Anyways, what are the stereotypes around lesbian women then?
If a lesbian isn't masculine, then they must be femme, which is hyperfeminine. Lesbians have been erased from many parts of history and media, sometimes even being outright ignored in feminist groups, even in the LGBTQ+ community. I have personally witnessed this during Pride Month, seeing all these elaborate pictures of all other parts of the community, and very rarely finding anything showing lesbians. Another harmful stereotype is that lesbians try to turn straight women gay. I believe sexism plays a big role in why each sexuality is seen the way they are.
Unfortunately, seeing our own community turn on each other is fairly common.
Speaking of, I think it's amazing how Bechdel hints that she feels overshadowed by her father's experience as a homosexual, and is even able to capture that feeling within the novel, like when her mother brings up his affairs in response to her coming out on page 58. As a reader, it feels like Bruce is a significant character when really it's Alison. This also reveals relevant gender problems within the LGBTQ+ history. As Canada states in their reflection article regarding LGBTQ+ history, the history has been and continues to be predominantly and unapologetically about male experience. Bringing it back to JJ, what is sexism defined as?
Sexism refers to every attitude, action, or institutional structure that devalues, restricts, or discriminates against a person or group, generally women, on the basis of biological sex, gender, or gender role. Homophobic straight men don't want to be associated with gay men and try to put them in a box that they can't see themselves in, and are so frightened with their fragile masculinity that anything outside of that norm is irregular and should be seen as feminine.
To bounce off that, in the 1900s, a gay liberation essay, Refuge from America, a Gay Manifesto, penned by white civil rights activist Carl Whitman, argued that black and gay activists faced common enemies: police, city hall, and capitalism. He proposed that the two groups work together, but acknowledged the uptight, supermasculine culture of black men. The attempts to define black masculinity within the Black Power movement became a troubling conflict for gay liberationists. In 1968, a memoir written by Eldridge Cleaver, a black man, wrote a very abrasive and opinionated claim on homosexuality, claiming it as a racial death wish, a sickness, and worse than infanticide.
Lovely. Wow.
Which, I know, is ironic, as Stonewall rights movement's most prominent figure was Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman. The novel references Stonewall on page 104. We have Allison in a Washington Square feeling as though she's experienced a secondhand contact high from LSD trips, or maybe a high of a different sort from the aftermath of the riots.
So what's Stonewall?
Well, Stonewall itself was a bar for many queer individuals to go in New York City. Now, police raids during that time were anything but unordinary for LGBTQ places. They were practically used to it. But on June 28th, 1969, things escalated. The raid did not go as planned. Instead of complying to the police, the group fought back. Sympathizers and other bystanders joined on the mob, and hundreds and thousands of youths participated. These protests and riots went on for 6 days.
But why was Stonewall and the riots important?
Because it set precedent for gay rights movements in the U.S. It's queer history that should be told and represented. Alison Bechdel shares those small nods and impacts of the movements into her life and into her autobiography, this autobiography. I really adore the small historic details that she displays and participates herself in.
The way this book challenges the ideas of gender, sex, and societal expectations like masculinity and femininity and sexuality is vastly important to the realistic representation the book offers us. As we stated previously, realistic and good representation of the LGBTQ+ community is what humanizes our community and brings about acceptance.
That concludes the end of our first recording for the HypeNothCast.
Thanks for listening to us rant about Fun Home, and we hope you enjoyed it. Yay!